Considered one of the most important musicians in the world, he was part of the greatest rock band of all time. Today, in our Hero's Journey episode, we'll talk about the emotional story of the great Sir Paul McCartney. Born in Liverpool, James Paul McCartney came into the world on June 18, 1942. Since childhood, he was passionate about music and received a lot of encouragement from his father, who was a trumpeter on a local band. The first major battle in our hero's life was facing the death of his mother, caused by cancer when he was only 14 years old. Living through a difficult period of mourning, Paul received a trumpet as a gift from his father, but despite quickly learning to play it without going out of tune, he wasn't very interested in the instrument because he couldn't sing while playing. It was only at the age of 15 that his passion for the musical world was tested after receiving a new instrument, the guitar. Even being left-handed, Paul used his creativity to find a way to learn to play it on his own. He had the brilliant idea of reversing the guitar strings, and in a few weeks, he managed to compose his first song, I Lost My Little Girl, in homage to his mother.
Well, I woke up late this morning, my head was in a whirl. Only then I realized I lost my little girl.
That was the first chapter of his story in music and art. During adolescence, Paul met a classmate named George who studied at the same school and was also passionate about music. Paul and George Harrison became friends at the age of 11, but they had no idea that this friendship would mark the history of rock and roll. Years later, McCartney met John Lennon after watching a show by the unknown band, then called Quarrymen. Lennon was the leader of the group, and after asking for a quick artistic demonstration from Paul, he immediately invited the musician to join him, playing the guitar. The two became inseparable friends and started composing several songs together. A year later, in 1958, after much insistence from Paul, George Harrison finally agreed to join the band as a guitarist. In addition to him, another young man named Stuart Sutcliffe was invited by Lennon to play bass. This was the first formation of the so-called band Lads from Liverpool. And years later, they would be known as the Beatles. Early in the band's trajectory, they had a valuable opportunity to perform in Hamburg, Germany. It would be the band's first international tour. At just 18 years old, Paul and the other members of the Beatles performed exhaustively for over 5 hours every dawn, providing him with an opportunity to improve his musical skills and create a strong bond with the other group members. Upon their return from Germany, the Beatles continued to perform in England, especially at the Cavern Club, a small club in the center of Liverpool that became an emblematic venue for the band. It was there that many people began to notice Paul's and his companions' great talent. To stand out even more from other bands that also performed in Liverpool, Paul and John intensified their compositions and created several original songs. Meanwhile, most of the other groups only played covers of famous bands. During this period, John and Paul solidified their musical composition partnership. They made an agreement, based only on a handshake, that regardless of who wrote the song, all would be signed by Lennon/McCartney. But it was in 1961 that the musician's career took a turn. They met manager Brian Epstein and quickly secured a contract with EMI Parlophone. By the decision of the record company, drummer Pete Best had to be replaced by Ringo Starr. A year later, Paul and Lennon composed the band's first major hit, Love Me Do, which catapulted the Beatles' career.
Love, love me do. You know I love you. I'll always be true. So please, love me do.
Soon after, they created the first of many songs that would reach the top of the charts in the United States. The song I Wanna Hold Your Hand stayed at number 1 for several weeks, much to the delight of the Beatlemaniacs. But it was in 1965 that one of Paul's greatest works was released. He composed the most recorded song in history, Yesterday was sung by artists of various styles and eras who reinterpreted the song over the years, contributing to the world record of over 2,200 recorded versions of the song. Despite being a rock band, the Beatles managed to immortalize hits that are still played in various places today and are listened to by crowds far beyond the rock bubble. Among these songs, two compositions by Paul McCartney became worldwide and timeless phenomena. The first was
Hey Jude.
The famous song was composed when John divorced his wife Cynthia. They had a son named Julian Lennon together. Paul stated in interviews that he wrote the song in the car while giving the boy a ride as a way to show his support during that difficult phase he was going through. Initially, the song was supposed to be Hey Jules, but the star thought Jude would sound better. Hey Jules. Yeah, I agree with him. The second song was composed in 1970 and arose after a dream of the singer with his deceased mother, coincidentally named Mary, like the mother of Jesus. Many believe that the song had a more religious meaning. In reality, it came from the message his mother sent, telling the star to calm down because everything in his life would work out. We can see that our friend Paul has a strong divine inspiration for making music, right? With such popularity, the Beatles also began to take a stand on social issues of the 1960s. For example, on a tour that the Beatles did in the United States, Paul insisted on including in the show contracts a clause stating that the band would not perform in places with segregated audiences. His anti-racist ideals would be even more explicit in the 1968 song Blackbird.
Blackbird singing in the dead of night. Take these broken wings and learn to fly.
But as everything in life, the Beatles also had their end. In 1967, Brian Epstein passed away, and Paul became the central figure of the Beatles. John Lennon didn't like it at all, which led to many conflicts between the two friends. Some fights even involved Yoko Ono, who was Lennon's partner at the time. After many reconciliation attempts and changes in the group, Paul McCartney publicly announced the end of the band on April 10, 1970. In fact, it was Paul who fought the most for the Beatles to continue playing and producing. He dreamed of bringing the band back to play live shows and produce more and more music. About the Beatles' breakup, Paul said in interviews that he turned to alcohol to console himself. The impact was so great that he almost gave up music. Fortunately, the time away from the stage didn't last long. Still in the 1970s, Paul released his first solo album, McCartney. He managed to bounce back and overcome the mourning of the end of the band by living on a remote farm in Scotland. There he wrote and produced all the songs alone in his home studio where he played all the instruments used in the new record. It's worth emphasizing that our hero Paul is a workaholic like few others. Shortly after his solo work, he summoned his partner Danny Lane and other musicians to form a band. Paul named his band Wings after his wife at the time, Linda, gave birth to Stella McCartney. The birth had complications and mother and daughter almost didn't survive. While praying during childbirth, Paul had a vision of a pair of wings, like an angel, protecting Linda and Stella. Even though he composed several romantic ballads, Paul was the last Beatle to get married. Paul and Linda became vegetarians in Scotland. They had a farm where they raised sheep. One day, while having lunch eating a leg of lamb, they saw through the window some sheep running happily through the field. Since then, they decided not to eat meat anymore, and the couple also began to advocate for the protection of animals, protesting against animal cruelty. To this day, even after the death of his partner in 1988, Paul demands on his tours that the team members do not eat meat. No animal food can be served backstage at shows, and there can also be no leather or animal origin furniture. Even the seats in his limousines cannot be leather. Currently, Paul is married to the businesswoman Nancy Shevell. Their love has lasted more than 10 years, and they seem very much in love now. In addition to being a former member of the world's most famous band, Paul received the title of Sir from Queen Elizabeth. The title is a way to honor members of the nobility for services to the country. In 1966, all band members had received the title of members of the British Empire. What's fun about this fact is that John Lennon became the only person to have ever returned this honor. As an act of protest against the UK's participation in the Vietnam War, John wrote a letter to the monarchy renouncing the title of nobility. You have to be very unconventional to receive such a title, but to renounce it, only a crazy man like John Lennon. On April 21, 1990, Paul McCartney performed at the Maracanã Stadium in Rio de Janeiro during the Get Back tour. In this concert, he attracted an impressive audience of almost 184,000 people, thus establishing the record for the largest paying audience at a single musical performance at Maracanã. In December 2020, Paul released his most recent album, McCartney 3. Highly anticipated by fans, the new work was entirely composed, produced, and recorded by the singer himself at the age of 78. His gift for music is so impressive that even today, after turning 80, he continues to tour various continents and maintains high energy during 3-hour shows without resorting to playback. With so much history and memorable achievements in the world of music, influencing different generations, it's impressive how McCartney remains creative and inventive. Good for the fans who continue to appreciate his work. And you, did you already know all these facts about the journey of our musical hero? Feel free to share other relevant information about his trajectory. And if you want to continue following the stories of ordinary people who became great heroes, subscribe to our channel to receive our next Hero's Journey episodes. Until next time.